There was a new payphone in town, at least if you believe what some anonymous conspiracy theorist had posted on the internet. Someone on the local paranormal forum had posted photos of a payphone which, to be fair, was in fairly decent condition, and they had insisted it had been installed recently. More likely than not, it had been there for decades, and neither the poster nor anyone else had noticed it until recently. I'm pretty sure any people who pay those things any mind anymore are kids who generally don't know what they are or what they're for. But the poster remained quite adamant that this particular payphone was a new addition, his only evidence being some low-resolution screenshots from Google Street View from the approximate location he was talking about, none of which showed the phone. Even granting that the phone was new, that still didn't make it paranormal, and the guy wasn't really making a very coherent argument about why it was. He just kept rambling on and on about how the phone would only work if you put in a shiny FDR dime printed prior to 1965, when they were still made from 90% silver. He said, "Give it a silver and you'll see." When he refused to elaborate on exactly how he figured out that the phone would only work with old American coins, everyone pretty much just assumed that he was full of it, and the thread fizzled out. But I just so happened to have a coin jar filled with interesting coins that I found in my change over the years, and it only took a moment of sorting through them before I found a US dime from 1963. I honestly couldn't think of a better way to spend it. And so I decided to check out the phone just after sunset, in the hopes there wouldn't be too much traffic that might make it difficult to make a phone call. It was right where the post had said it would be, and as I viewed it with my own eyes, I was instantly convinced that I would have noticed it if it had been there before. The thing was turquoise, like some iconic household appliance from the 1950s. Its color and its pristine condition clashed so much with the surrounding weathered brick buildings that it would have been impossible not to notice it. Standing in front of it, I could see that there was a logo of some cartoon atom in a silver inlay beneath the name Oppenheimer's Opportunities in calligraphic lettering. Beneath the atom was an infinite symbol followed by the number 59, which I assumed was supposed to read as Forever 59. It had to have been a modern-day recreation. There was no way it could have been over 65 years old and look so good. It had a rotary dial, as was befitting its alleged time period, beneath which was a small notice that should have held usage instructions, but instead held a poem. If it's gold, it glitters. If it's silver, it shines. If it's plutonium, it blisters. Won't you please spare a dime? That at least explained how the original poster figured out he needed silver dimes to operate the thing, and why he didn't just come out and say it. I'm not sure I would have gone looking for something that might give me radiation burns. I briefly considered leaving and possibly coming back with a Geiger counter, but I figured there was no way that this thing was the demon core or the elephant's foot. I also didn't have the slightest idea where to get a Geiger counter, and by the time I found one, it was entirely possible that the phone would be gone before I got back. I wasn't willing to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. Even if the phone was radioactive, brief exposure couldn't be that bad, right? I gingerly reached out and grabbed the receiver, holding it with a folded handkerchief for the radiation, I guess. It was heavy in my hand, and even through the handkerchief, I could feel it was ever so slightly warm. It was enough to give me an uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I nevertheless slowly lifted it up to my ear to see if there was a dial tone. I was hardly surprised when it was completely dead. After testing it a bit by spinning the dial or tapping down on the hook, I put a modern dime in just to see what it would do. Unsurprisingly, nothing happened. And so, with nothing left to lose, I dropped my silver dime into the slot and waited to see what would happen. As the dime passed through the slot with a rhythmic metallic clinking, I could feel soft vibrations as gears inside the phone whirred to life, and the receiver greeted me with a melodic yet unsettling dial tone. I would describe it as forcefully cheery, like it had to pretend that everything was wonderful, even though it was having the worst day of its life. It was a sensation that sank deeply into my brain and lingered for long after the call had ended. Thank you for using Oppenheimer's Opportunities Psychotronic Autophone. An enthusiastic, pre-recorded male voice greeted me, sounding like it had come straight out of the 1950s. Here at Oppenheimer's, our mission is to preserve the promise of post-war America that the rest of the world has long turned its back on. A promise of peace and prosperity, of nuclear power too cheap to meter, and nuclear families too precious to measure. A world where everyone had its place and knew his place. A world where we respected rather than resented our betters. We're proudly dedicated to bringing you yesterday's tomorrow, today. You were promised flying cars, and at Oppenheimer's Opportunities, we've got 'em. We'd happily see the world reduced to radioactive ashes, then fall from its golden age. Which is why, for us, year after year, it's forever 59. Please keep the receiver pressed firmly against your ear for the duration of the returning procedure. We're honing in on the optimal psychotronic signal to ensure maximum conformity. Suboptimal signals can result in serious side effects. So, for your own sake, do not attempt to interrupt the signal. If at any point during the procedure you experience any discomfort, don't be alarmed. This is normal. If at any point during the returning procedure you would like to make a phone call, we regret to inform you that service is currently unavailable. If at any point you would like the returning procedure to be terminated, you will be a grave disappointment to us. For all other concerns, please dial 0 to speak to an operator. And thank you once again for using Oppenheimer's Opportunities Psychotronic Autophone, your only choice in psychotronic returning since '59. The recording ended abruptly, replaced with the same insidiously insipid dial tone as before. I started pulling the receiver away from my ear, only to be struck by a strange sense of vertigo. Everything around me started spinning until my vision cut out, refusing to return until I placed the receiver back against my ear. When I was able to see it again, the scene around me had changed into the silent aftermath of a nuclear attack. Not just an attack, but an apocalypse. Not a single building around me was left intact. Everything was toppled and crumbling and tumbling to dust, dust that I could feel fill my lungs with every breath. The air was thick, gritty, and filthy, and I was amazed that it was still breathable at all. It didn't smell rotten because there was no trace of life left in it. It was dead, dusty air that no one had breathed in years. Radiation shadows from the victims caught in the blast were scorched into numerous nearby surfaces, many of which still bore tattered propaganda posters that were barely legible through the haze. The city had been bombed to hell and back, and no effort at cleanup or reconstruction had been made. It had been abandoned for years, if not decades, and yet there was no overgrowth from plants reclaiming the land. Nothing grew here anymore. Nothing could. The sky above was strange, shiny canopy of rippling clouds, illuminated only by a distant pale light. But somehow I knew that radioactive fallout still fell from those clouds even to this day. Long ago, hundreds of gigatons of salted bombs had blasted civilization to ruins in a day, while sweeping the earth in apocalyptic firestorms, throwing billions of tons of particulates high up into the atmosphere. But now, all was silent, except for that intolerable psychotronic dial tone and the insidiously howling wind. Only when I realized that those were the only sounds, did I realize that they were perfectly harmonized with one another. I looked up into the sky at the ash clouds that should have washed out long ago, and I realized it wasn't the wind that was howling. It was them. The ripples in the clouds were constantly forming into screaming and melting faces before dissipating back into the ash. I was instantly stricken with dread that they might notice me, and I wanted so desperately to flee and cower in the rubble, but I was completely unable to move my feet. I wasn't even able to pull the phone away from my ear, and so I did the only thing I could, summoning all the strength and will that I could manage. I slowly lifted my free hand, placed my index finger into the smoothly spinning rotary, and dialed 0. "Don't worry," came the same voice as before, though this time it sounded much more like a live person than a recording. "This isn't real. Not for you, and not for us. You just needed to see it. Nuclear annihilation is an existential fear no one ever knew before the Cold War, and it's one that's been far too quickly forgotten. No one can be galvanized to defend a world in decline the same way they would a world under attack. A world rotting from within invites disillusionment, dissent, and despair. A world facing an external threat forces you to fight for it, to love it wholeheartedly, warts and all. Without the threat of annihilation, every crack in the sidewalk is compared to perfection, and we bemoan the lack of a utopia, as if that were something we were entitled to, and unjustly denied. When you see the cracks in the sidewalk, don't think of utopia. Think of what you're seeing now. Think of how terrifyingly close this came to reality, and how terrifyingly close it still is. And yet, you must not let the terror keep you from aspiring to greater things, as the fear of nuclear meltdowns, radioactive waste, and mutually assured destruction stunted the progress of atomic energy in your world. The instinct to fear fire is natural, but the drive to understand and tame it is fundamental to humanity and civilization. Decline is born of complacency as easily as it is from cynicism. You must love and fight for both the present and the future. Do you understand yet? Or do I need to turn the autophone up another notch? What? What are they? I managed to choke out, my head still turned upwards, eyes still locked on the faces forming in the clouds. My son, I already told you this thing can't make phone calls, the man said, though not without some irony in his voice. But to put it simply, they are the dead. The nukes that went off in this world weren't just salted, they were spiced too. The sound waves produced by the blast were designed to have a particular psychotronic resonance to them, causing every human consciousness that heard it to literally explode out of their skulls. Explode? I asked meekly, the tension in my own head having already grown far from comfortable. That's right, kablammo, the man shouted. The intention was just to maximize the body count, but there was an even darker side effect that the bomb makers hadn't dared to envision. Those disembodied consciousness didn't just go and line up at the pearly gates. No, sir. Caught in the psychotronic shockwave, they rode it all the way up into the stratosphere and got caught in the planet's spanning ash clouds. Their minds are perpetually stuck in the moment of their apocalyptic deaths, and since their screams are all in perfect resonance with each other, they just grow louder and louder. That wind you hear, it's not wind. It's billions of disembodied voices trapped in the stratospheric ash cloud, amplified to the point that you could hear them all the way down on the ground. So my head's going to explode and my ghost is going to be stuck haunting a fallout cloud for all of eternity? I demanded in disbelief. Disbelief I desperately clung to, as it was the only thing keeping me from succumbing to a full existential meltdown. Not to worry, son. As long as you don't resonate with him, you'll be fine, he assured me in a warm, fatherly tone. Your head won't explode, and you won't get sucked up into the ash clouds. Just listen to the dial tone. Let your mind resonate it instead. Once you believe in the wonders of the atomic age, you will be free of the fear of an atomic holocaust. No, you're lying. The only signal is coming from the phone, not the sky. I managed to protest. Son, Paxton Brinkman doesn't lie. My psychotronic returning makes it impossible for me to consciously acknowledge any kind of cognitive dissonance. The man tried to assuage me. So when I tell you something, you had better believe that it is the one and only truth in my heart. That's what makes me such a great salesman, CEO, and war propagandist. Honestly, the screaming coming from the cloud is both real and fatal, and if you don't let the Adaphone's counter signal do its thing, I'm telling you, your goose is cooked. I'm sorry, is it just cooked now? Is that what the kids are saying? You're cooked, son? Sans goose? You said it yourself, this isn't real. You wanted me to see the apocalypse so that I'll embrace salvation. Your salvation? I managed to croak out. There are no ghosts in the fallout. You just want me to be too afraid to reject you, to hang up before you finish doing whatever it is that you're trying to do to me. There was a long pause where I heard nothing but the screaming ghosts and a screeching dial tone before Brinkman spoke again. If you really believe that, then go ahead and hang up the phone, he suggested calmly. I stood there, panting heavily but saying nothing, my fingers still clutching the receiver and pressing it against my ear. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the nuclear hellscape around me, tried to focus on the fact that it wasn't real. The dial tone that was trying to rewrite my brain was the real threat, not the imagined ghosts in the fallout-saturated stratosphere. But the louder the dial tone grew, the less forcefully cheery it sounded. It didn't sound sincere necessarily, but it sounded better than eternity as a fallout ghost. I began to wonder if it would be better to end up like Brinkman than risk such a horrible fate. Would it be more rational to choose the more pleasant hell, or was it worth the risk to ensure that my mind remained my own? Slowly but surely, I gradually loosened my grasp on the receiver until I felt it slip from my hand. As the sound of the dial tone faded, the vertigo that I had felt from before came back tenfold, and an instantly debilitating cluster headache overcame me as I cried out and collapsed to the ground. The pain was so intense that I could barely think, and for a moment I did truly think that my head was going to explode, and that my consciousness was to be condemned to a radioactive ash cloud for all of eternity. Before I lost consciousness, I remembered hearing the Brinkman's voice again, distant and dreamlike from the dangling receiver. Son, you've been a grave disappointment. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Someone had called an ambulance after they found me collapsed outside. When I told the healthcare workers and the police my story, they told me there had been no phone there, and never had been. They weren't sure what was wrong with me, or if I was lying or delirious, and so they kept me for observation. The fact that there was no phone and no evidence that any of it had been real was enough to make me seriously doubt if it had all happened, and I spent several hours thinking about what else could have possibly explained what happened to me. That's when the radiation burns started to appear. The doctors estimate that I was exposed to at least 200 rads of radiation, maybe more. It's too soon to say if I received a fatal dose, but it definitely would have been if I had stayed on the phone call much longer. The doctors are flabbergasted over how I could have received so much radiation, and there are specialists sweeping the streets with Geiger counters to find an orphan source. I wish I knew where I could have gotten one of those earlier. But then again, I suppose I didn't really need one. I was warned after all. If it's plutonium, it blisters. Now it seems that I and my goose may be cooked.